The Legend of Dragoon is a title that has been recommended to me for a very long time, definitely predating my YouTube channel. The problem for me was always that I'd built up an idea of what Legend of Dragoon was prior to actually playing it, that much like some of the contemporary reviews had claimed, it was a poor man's Final Fantasy VII and a shallow world with a pretty veneer and an input gimmick that masked the fighting system's lack of depth. To be frank, I was also a little worried that I'd suck at a system that required timing to maximize an attack. There's also the interesting dichotomy when reading others' opinions of the game, which exist with most Mammoth JRPGs, but the vitriol and disgust for the title, alongside the absolute adoration, is sometimes jarring. But after completing the game, I can comfortably say that while there are plenty of minor and major even gripes, when one considers the main selling points of what the game offers and how impressively it presents it, it's deserving of its position as a cult favorite. It's well known by now that this was Sony's attempt to rival some of Square's big boy JRPGs. It had an enormous budget and a huge production staff and focused heavily on presentation, with some 35 minutes of cutscenes, and took 3 years to complete. The game starts off with the main protagonist, Dart, having just returned from a failed revenge trip to locate the Black Monster, an entity that annihilated his birth city of Neat and killed his family. On the way back, he is attacked by a green dragon and saved by an unknown woman named Rose before arriving at his hometown, only to find that it has been sacked by Sandora, a rebel faction in the Serdian Civil War, and his childhood friend Shauna has been kidnapped. It's a quick start that thrusts the player into a war-torn territory and doesn't really ever settle down for long. The group is in constant pursuit of someone at all times, whether it be confronting Dole for his transgressions or tirelessly pursuing Lloyd to determine what his behind-the-scene machinations are all about. I'll immediately admit that the well-documented translation issues are most noticeable early on, and the dialogue is often cliché or strangely off at times, again probably connected to some translation issues here and there. But the overall story I found to be quite intriguing, if not obviously a little bit derivative at times. The game introduces plenty of little morsels and elements that are eventually keenly woven into the later game developments. There are very few set pieces or early bits of lore and world building that don't come back and have some relevance, which is really good storytelling. And while the characters do occasionally feel underdeveloped, there are some underappreciated moments and efforts in this game, such as the way that it unapologetically depicts male intimacy through Lavitz and Dart's giddy friendship. These two are almost instantly buds, and this was refreshing. There was no adversarial segment to explore or a begrudging acceptance of the other's help or some patriarchal duty of one to the other. They just truly liked each other. It was just nice to see two dudes that genuinely got along, and that was shown through some goofy and touching moments. Though some characters did need a stronger effort at expanding or humanizing them, this game takes near constant punches, even from fans of it, for being a game with a great story but with poor and cliched writing and at times frustratingly obtuse characters. I don't completely agree with this, but I will concede that there were areas that needed improvement. I don't demand that all RPGs deftly include some excursion into tough psychological problems, or have some arcane illusion to be excavated by only a few super perceptive players, but I do want to be challenged every now and then, and outside of some admittedly cool and devastating revelations that do prod at you to consider a specific party member's heart-wrenching task, that I actually don't think was explored as thoroughly or as poignantly as it could have been, I just didn't feel that way outside of a few personal conflicts and some well-rounded portraits of how diverse the world's inhabitants are. However, it is a game that deals with major, life-defining moments of sacrifice, sometimes very complicated sacrifice that just simply begs to be expounded upon, and tells a deliciously straightforward story with an immense payoff and smartly interconnects tons of primary characters and explores the past's weight on the present. I just kind of wish that the characters and dialogue had been a little sharper and a little more developed. Legend of Dragoon's biggest distancing factor from other JRPGs is its implementation of additions, which are timing-based prompts after you initiate a basic attack. The game is a classic turn-based fighting system, and I immediately fell in love with additions. The game's director and designer Yasuyuki Hasebi said of additions that he wanted to give a feel to the player that they were actually fighting, needing to stay engaged and not just stare at a screen. This is certainly an engaging way to enhance the basic attack function that is immensely rewarding, especially as the game progresses and they become very long and admittedly quite frustrating to master and routinely pull off. My only major suggestion would have been to have multiple additions available for selection during combat because of how hopeless it feels to get caught in a boss battle after having just switched to a new or underdeveloped addition. I'd suppose, and some might disagree, that this is the most important part of the game to buy into. If this is a deal breaker for a player, it's such an integral and constant part of this game that I'd imagine some bit of disgust or even hate for the game to build up. When one then considers all of the other decisions made, no magic outside of items or Dragoon form, and those items' power is augmented by slamming the X button repeatedly and just isn't worth it outside of boss encounters, limited storage space of items, a really high encounter rate coupled with meager XP and gold gains that was apparently even lower in the Japanese version, and that kind of just makes me shudder, another timing sequence when in Dragoon form, it's just gotta elicit a strong repulsion, and I get it. But it worked for me. I loved the additions. I loved trying to level as many of them up as I could so the high encounter rate just didn't bother me. I also didn't experience the same kind of vexation others felt when they weren't inundated with healing options. I just didn't have an issue here. I used 10 to 12 spaces always for healing items and made use of the few Dragoon transformations that heal and the multiple heal up spots in various dungeons, and only occasionally needed to block to heal, which some swear is a must to beat bosses, and that just wasn't true for me. The player can transform into a Dragoon after accumulating a minimum of 100 SP, which you gain through additions, outside of Shauna and Miranda that is. They just get SP through basic, regular attacks. And 100 SP grants you 1 turn in Dragoon form up to 5 total turns. This grants you access to all kinds of spells, mostly damage dealing, and they utilize your MP pool. The most taxing aspect of the combat for me was simply the amount of time each encounter consumed, and good luck if you decided to use a late game Dragoon spell or you were fighting against a late game boss. I love the payoff in JRPGs of seeing these just grand and busy and spectacular spells, but man does it build up, and every encounter, even some runts, seem to have them in spades. Again, if the addition system bores you or frustrates you, the rest of the system's peculiarities are going to exhaust you even further, because the bulk of your time should be spent spamming additions. If you try to escape this fact, you will surely run into some wild late game problems. You'll need to level them up to get more damage per addition, and if you want the Master Edition for any character, which is the strongest edition, you'll just need to have them all maxed out too, even though all prior editions are unlocked based on character level. It hooked me. The entire loop hooked me. As the player progresses and becomes better at pulling off the tougher additions, characters become more useful and grow too. This connection of player skill to character usefulness is really nice in a JRPG and very rewarding. While I see and perfectly understand the complaints, and many of them baffle me too, I just enjoyed it a lot. Legend of Dragoon made many odd, almost masochistic design choices. Even the towns that are all beautiful and cluttered and alive and distinct can be a nightmare to navigate. Each great thing about the game seems to be accompanied by 2 to 3 bewildering counterexamples. Even with its 3 years of development, it felt inchoate, just not quite ready for consumption in some areas. Equipment with no stats, for instance, making the player check against other items to determine the exact numbers on any given piece. But there's just something about the simplicity and the moment-to-moment rewards of the additions and of the slowly unfurling mysteries the world holds that wouldn't let me go. Of the gut-wrenching sacrifices many of the characters made, and depictions of the war-torn world struggling to survive, showing good people helping the oppressed. Dart is a good guy, even if a little bit overprotective, which makes sense given Shauna and his past. Lavitz and Albert and even Kongol have great moments. I know they don't go that layer or two deeper we usually expect from JRPGs, but I still appreciate the story, the world, the towns are great to look at, highly addictive additions. The music is superb outside of a few jarring transitions, and unlike some apparently, I also never got tired of the menu screen tune or the battle music or the voice acting, which was fine outside of a few instances where it absolutely was not fine. It's a game deserving of the love it receives, even if it might be hard at times to see past its many cracks. I'd suggest everybody that has any affinity for JRPGs give it a shot. It just might surprise you.